seen you there. And this secret world that Marie Antoinette had created, this private world, caused a lot of resentment among other courtiers who felt excluded. She had been incredibly popular at the beginning of her reign. There had been cries of "Long live the Queen" at the opera. She was mobbed by her subjects when she walked through the Tuileries in the center of Paris. But this, over time, changed as she stopped appearing in public. And all sorts of scandalous libels were written about what exactly went on behind these closed doors, about orgies that took place, about the immense standard and scale of expenditure that happened. And where once she had been popular, now national feeling turned against her. And this would only be exacerbated by the diamond necklace affair. So we are now in the summer of 1785. The first date for the payment of the necklace has fallen due, and what is going to happen? Jeanne has no intention of supplying the 400,000 francs that are about to be paid to Rohan in order to hand over the jewelers, because she got the necklace in the first place so that she would have this money. So she tells Rohan that actually the money the Queen had set aside to pay for this necklace, she's gone and spent it. Would it be okay if she paid 700,000 francs for this in October? And the jewelers, surprisingly but grudgingly, agree with this, because there's very little they can do about it if the Queen decides they're not going to pay them. However, this starts to make Rohan suspicious, and he finally obtains a sample of the Queen's handwriting. He realizes that it bears no resemblance to the letters that he's received and to the writing on the bill of sale that is in his possession, and he calls Jeanne in and he confronts her, and he says, "Have you been deceiving me?" And somehow, Jeanne convinces him that she hasn't. She says, "How can you possibly risk everything? How could you possibly risk your chance to become chief minister at this moment? How could you throw everything away by such accusations?" For some reason, either because he is so blinded by ambition, or because he feels that he doesn't want to provoke Jeanne at this instance because she might act erratically, and who knows what she would do, Rohan backs down. He says, "That's fine, okay," and he actually does not take any other measures up until the day of his arrest. Jeanne, meanwhile, had been planning anyway to confront Rohan and come clean with what she was done. She was going to say, "I've stolen this necklace. The only way for you to prevent any kind of scandal emerging is if your family, who is extraordinarily wealthy, pay off the jewelers. And that, otherwise, humiliation upon humiliation will be heaped upon you and your family. There's no way you'll ever be able to achieve political office." And that was her plan. And the truth is, as Rohan later admitted, that would have worked. And he was prepared to have paid off the diamonds, the necklace, had she got the chance to say this to him. Unfortunately, she didn't, because of the jewelers. Ever since the necklace had been bought, Rohan had been nagging them and nagging them and nagging them to write a thank you letter to the Queen, saying, "Thank you very much for buying this necklace from us." And they'd refused, in part because the Queen had forbidden them ever from speaking to her about the necklace. Eventually, Rohan sits them down and gets Burma to write a thank you letter, which Burma delivers to the Queen. And before he can receive a response, a minister enters the room and he's shooed out, and so he doesn't hear anything about it. A few days later, he approaches a waiting lady of the Queen, a woman named Madame de Campan, and says, "So, did you get the letter? What do you think? What's the Queen say?" And Madame de Campan says, "The Queen thinks you're absolutely mad. What is this necklace that you're talking about? The Queen has never bought a necklace from you. She knows the necklace is hideous. Why are you going on about this necklace?" And Burma says, "Come, I know this is supposed to be secret, but we both know the Queen's actually got the necklace." But Madame de Campan is insistent. She knows nothing about the necklace. And she is insistent and immediately suspicious. She approaches the Queen. The Queen approaches her most loyal ally on the ministerial council, the Baron de Breteuil, who it happens is also a mortal enemy of Rohan's, and they bring the Burmas in for questioning, and it turns out that the person who got hold of the necklace, supposedly for the Queen, was the Cardinal de Rohan. And the Queen hates the Cardinal de Rohan, Breteuil hates the Cardinal de Rohan. They're appalled that he should have tried to get hold of the necklace in her name. They're convinced that he's done so because he's covered in debt, and this is the only way he could possibly contemplate of ever paying it off. And because Breteuil is so vitriolic in his hatred towards Rohan, he vows, as does the Queen, to destroy him completely. And so it happens that as Rohan is preparing for Mass, he's led to the Queen's apartments. There he is questioned by Louis XV. He says, "How do you know that the Queen ordered you to do this?" And Rohan says, "Well, I have this signed bill of sale in my possessions, according to one account of the events, which is signed by the Queen." And he produces this, and Louis looks at it, and he's appalled. He says at the bottom, "Marie Antoinette de France. Don't you know the Queen never signs her name in this way? She only ever signed her name Marie Antoinette or Antoinette. Don't you know that this is an utter forgery?" And the Queen, who up until this point had been entirely silent, turned to Rohan and bitterly said, "How could you possibly think that I would have instructed you to act for me in such a matter? Don't you know how much I hate you?" 10 minutes. 5. 10. Right. "Don't you know how much I hate you?" And so at this point, Marie Antoinette Rohan is sent away. He's taken to the Bastille. Jeanne is arrested a few days later. Nicolas, her husband, escapes to England and is involved in an extraordinary adventure in which French agents try to poison him and then to kidnap him by dressing up as coal miners and sailing up to Newcastle in the north of England in order to get hold of him. And a trial begins that captivates the whole of France. And the essence of this trial is nothing to do with the theft of the necklace. It's not to do with the theft, because the king and queen want nothing to do with it. They believe they've had no involvement. What is at stake is the reputation of the monarchy itself. Was the queen the kind of woman who would dress up, disguise herself, go out to the gardens of Versailles at midnight and have an assignation with a man who was a known roué? Was she that kind of sexually loose person? And was she the kind of greedy spendthrift who would happily buy an enormous diamond necklace even though the country was steeped in debt without her husband knowing? And this becomes the crux of the case. And from the beginning, the royal family are determined to destroy Rohan. And things look like they're going against him. The evidence is framed in certain ways. He is in a very difficult position. He doesn't know where the person who he knelt before in the gardens of Versailles is. He doesn't know where the necklace is, and he doesn't know, because a handwriting analysis has been performed, where the person who forged the letters is. Fortunately, he has a very assiduous legal team who first hunt down Nicole, the prostitute who played the Queen, in Brussels, where the French foreign minister, who is an ally of the Rohan family, manages to retrieve her. She is also placed in the Bastille and put on trial. The diamonds are found in London, and he also manages to recruit an informer from Jeanne's household who remembers at various crucial points influxes of money and people hiding away, writing letters. But the most important thing is they still haven't found Villette. They still haven't found the guy who forged the letters. And only after about 6 months is he discovered in Geneva busking. And because he's accidentally involved in a fight, he is arrested, his identity is unmasked, and he's repatriated to France. And he is the person who cracks open the case, who convinces the magistrates that Rohan's versions of events is true, and that Jeanne's, who has said, how could I possibly have done all this stuff? How could Rohan possibly have believed that he met the Queen? Isn't he some great man, and who am I? I'm nothing. Villette's arrest leads to the case breaking open. Eventually, by a very, very tight margin, Rohan is acquitted, Jeanne is convicted, she is branded, she is whipped, and she's taken away to the Salpêtrière, the penitentiary for women in Paris. And the case is a disaster for the monarchy, because what the court has effectively ruled is that Marie Antoinette is exactly that kind of person. that it was legitimate for Rohan to believe that she would have in secret instructed him to buy this necklace, that she would have had a midnight meeting with him in a grove of Versailles dedicated to the goddess of love. And this, and though the reputation of the monarchy had been on decline for a number of years, this was exacerbated in the wake of the diamond necklace affair. Jeanne eventually escapes from prison, writes incredibly inventive, scandalous memoirs in which she claims to have had a lesbian affair with Marie Antoinette, in which she tries to, exposes what goes on behind closed doors at Versailles. And all through the revolution, there are different factions trying to get their hands on Jeanne because she is considered, her story is considered so important, either to discrediting the monarchy or discrediting, or the monarchists wanted to suppress it so that no one heard about it. And eventually, in 1793, I think, in the trial of Marie Antoinette, she's accused of all sorts of things, including looking at a Republican guard in the wrong way, to molesting her children. But one of the things, the charges against her, is her role in the destruction of Madame de la Motte in the diamond necklace affair. Thank you. Sorry? There is some time for questions if you'd like to ask questions or not. No questions, fine. Oh, is that a question? Is that a question? No. Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah? Hey, there's one over there.
Well, it's a very insignificant question, but I had one gap in your story. How was the French police around able to find Jeanne in Brussels? How did she land up in Brussels?
Jeanne wasn't in Brussels. Jeanne was actually arrested very shortly after, but Nicole, who played the Queen in this scene in the garden, was in Brussels. How did they find it is actually interesting. It's because the French foreign minister was effectively a client of the royal family. He owed much of his career to their support. He effectively put the entire French ambassadorial network at their disposal. So you look in the archives and you see that the French Foreign Minister, Vergennes, circulated descriptions of the people that they were looking for among the ambassadors. And so she was not living, I don't think she might have been living under a false name, but it soon became clear who she was in Brussels. It was quite hard to extradite her because she'd gone to Brussels, specifically because it was very difficult to get people out of there if they didn't want to, once they left. But the French actually sent out a police officer who she was acquainted with, who'd arrested her a number of times for prostitution, and who was kind of sympathetic to her. And he rather sweet-talked her into coming home. And so she was like, oh, come home, it'll be fine. She comes home, and immediately she's sent away to the Bastille, where she spends about 9 months. It turns out she's pregnant, so she gives birth in the Bastille just before the trial. So that's how they were able to do it. Yes, over there.
But wasn't Marie Antoinette known for her excessive spending? As far as, like, would the necklace really have been that big of a deal for her to buy? Since, I mean, I guess that was what all the rumors were, that she gambled, she spent, like, it would be nothing to her as far as her spending?
Well, absolutely, but the point is that she didn't buy this necklace, and it was an enormous sum of money. She had very recently bought a palace in Saint-Cloud on national funds that had been arranged for her by Breteuil, who was her ally on the ministerial council, but she didn't buy the necklace. And there was a certain amount of retrenchment that was going on in the spending of the French royal household during these years, and it was absolutely necessary because the country was bankrupt, and they were paying thousands and thousands and thousands of francs to all sorts of people who happened to be friends of the king and queen, or their brother or sister or cousin or whatever. So yes, she did have a reputation, not unjustifiably, for extravagance, but at the same time, this was not something that you can convict her of doing, because she wasn't involved in it. Blame for it was able to kind of accumulate around her because of her reputation, and it certainly meant that her reputation diminished even further. And that, I think, is what makes it such a pivotal moment at this point, the diamond necklace affair. This is really the point where enmity against the French royal family, both Marie Antoinette, who had started to be despised, and Louis XVI, who was generally considered a very decent sort, but because after Rohan was acquitted, he sent him into eternal exile, and people thought that this was acting tyrannically, that the king, who was supposed to be the embodiment of justice, was acting in breach of it. And these accusations of tyranny become louder and louder through the French Revolution until that's exactly what he's convicted of when he's sent to the guillotine. So this is really the beginning of the first notes that you hear of the royal family being accused of being tyrants. Yes, sorry, there's a man over there.
Very interesting, elaborate. Where did you get the archives? I was just interested in that archival material. And just, have you written it like a sort of detective fiction, or is it more history?
Well, it's heavily narrative. It's not detective. And I think, to deal with your second question first, a lot of the way this has been treated is to make it unnecessarily mysterious. A number of accounts you read, it's like, did the cardinal really do it? Did Marie Antoinette really do it? Was she really trying to destroy him? Did she really use Jeanne as a pawn? And if you look at the evidence, it becomes very obvious that Jeanne is the person who steals the necklace. So I haven't written it as a detective drama. What I think it is more is a courtroom drama, because when Rohan is arrested, the odds are stacked against him. It seems like he's going to be convicted because the powers that be want him to be convicted. And the excitement is how he manages to get himself off in the end. In terms of archival material, there is a lot of it in France. All of the records of the trial are kept, so there are dozens of pages of interrogations of witnesses, of the accused. There's loads of witness statements. One of the ways that the French legal system worked was that these confrontations were staged between the accused, between each of the accused and between the accused and the witnesses. So there's lots and lots of material there. There's reports from the Foreign Affairs Archives. Rohan's lawyer keeps a big dossier. There's enormous, and lots of the people involved print memoirs, which are incredibly unreliable and often 30 or 40 years later, but nonetheless, if read in the right way, can provide some insight into how people acted at the time. One more question, if there's one more question. Yes?
I want to know what's your personal opinion on the character of Marie Antoinette.
What is my personal opinion on the character of Marie Antoinette? She was very unfortunate. She was unfortunate in the person that she was married to, and had her husband been a more forceful and decisive character, she might not have suffered the fate that she suffered. There are large parts of the French Revolution where Louis becomes incredibly depressed and more or less doesn't make any decisions at all. So she is the person who ends up plotting royal policy even while they're captives. Obviously, she becomes enormously distrusted because she's Austrian. She's seen as a foreigner. There's still a great deal of French hatred towards Austria. So she is in an invidious position, and it's really around her that all the hatred of the royal family coagulates. And going back to what I said before, I think the other important thing to realize is this very hard position that she's put in when she arrives in the French court, that she is about to enter adulthood. She is about to possibly have all of the feelings of independence and being grown up that you expect, and suddenly she is in this very alien court where she knows no one, she thinks everyone is an enemy. She reads these letters from her mother telling her off, and she wonders, how does my mother know about all of these things that I've supposedly done? And it turns out that the Austrian ambassador, who is the one person who she thinks is a friend, is reporting everything she does back to Maria Theresa. So she is very isolated, and it's not a surprise that she acts in the way she does, that she tries to carve out this little space that is just her own. And though it does have terrible consequences, and it probably wasn't the wisest course of action, it is, I think, a completely understandable one. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking the sponsors of this session, the Indian Quarterly. Welcome to the Zeeb Jaipur Literary Festival, brought to you by Rajnigandha. This session is supported by the Indian Quarterly, which is a literary cultural magazine, and we're very grateful to them. This is How to Ruin a Queen, Marie Antoinette, the Stolen Diamonds, and the Scandal That Shook the French Throne, with Jonathan Beckman, introduced by Naresh Fernandes.
Good afternoon. It was grotesque and almost literally unbearable. It resembled an item of chainmail or something a monk might wear in penitential self-chastisement. From these descriptions, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to guess that the object at the heart of Jonathan Beckman's dazzling tale is an enormous necklace studded with 647 diamonds and weighing 2,800 carats that was involved in a con artist trick that captivated all of Europe at the end of the 18th century. In his scholarly, immensely entertaining book, How to Ruin a Queen, Marie Antoinette, The Stolen Diamonds and the Scandal That Shook the French Throne, Jonathan Beckman rolls out a gripping cast of characters and weaves together a tragicomic tale of almost improbable events. There's the cake-loving empress, of course, and the poor dupe, Cardinal Louis de Rohan. There are midnight meetings in the park, jailbreaks, a duel fought with poisoned pigs, and swords of lesbian pornography. So without further ado, I'm most delighted to welcome Jonathan Beckman. Jonathan is senior editor with The Literary Review, a lively journal that you know for its irreverent, amusing writing and for handing out the least sought-after award in literary history, the Bad Sex and Fiction Award. Jonathan has degrees from the University of Cambridge and in intellectual and cultural history from Queen Mary, University of London. How to Ruin a Queen is his first book. Jonathan, abbreviated to half an hour.
Thank you very much, Naresh. Can everyone hear me? No. Can you hear me now? If I look down at myself. This talk was supposed to be 50 minutes, and that was cutting it quite fine in order to get everything in. So you can't hear me. Can you? Yes. Is that better? Yes, good, brilliant. So the talk was supposed to be 50 minutes, and there was still a lot to get in, so it's now going to be 25 minutes. So it's going to go quite fast, and you'll have to concentrate. But if you had any questions at the end, do come up and ask me. On the 15th of September, 1785, Cardinal Louis de Rohan, who was the head of the French church, was arrested in the Palace of Versailles, where the French court sat, as he was preparing to celebrate Mass for the Queen Marie Antoinette's birthday. He was brought before the King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette and accused of using the Queen's name to obtain one of the most expensive pieces of jewelry in Europe, a diamond necklace worth 1.6 million francs. Rohan admitted obtaining the necklace on behalf of the Queen, but said he had been instructed to do so through an intermediary named Jeanne, Comtesse de la Motte Valois. The Queen denied having given these instructions, denied knowing who this woman was. Rohan was taken away, imprisoned in the Bastille, and this thus began one of the great scandals of pre-revolutionary France, the diamond necklace affair, which gripped Europe for almost a year and had consequences that rumbled down through to the revolution. Now, Louis de Rohan was born into one of the most distinguished noble families in France. They trace their lineage back deep into the mists of time to the mythical king of Brittany, Conan Meriadoc. His uncle was the best friend of the French king Louis XV, who ruled for much of the 18th century. His aunt was the governess to 3 future kings of France, Louis XVI, Louis XVIII, and Charles X. And from an early age, Rohan had been chosen to be the standard bearer for the next generation of his family. He was destined, so he had been told, for high office. He was educated at the Sorbonne. At the age of 18, he was made coadjutor to his uncle, who was Bishop of Strasbourg. Now, a coadjutor is a kind of ecclesiastical crown prince. Yes, is that? Which meant that he was, at that age, going to be next in line to inheriting the see and so becoming one of the most powerful bishops in France. Unfortunately, his uncle stubbornly refused to die, and Louis's career kind of dwindled and stagnated somewhat. He behaved as many 18th century French priests did. He hunted, he chased after women, he frequented free-thinking salons in Paris, and he added up to nothing much. Matters changed completely in 1771 when he was appointed as the French ambassador to the Austrian court in Vienna. Now, this was one of the most important diplomatic posts going because in the previous year, Marie Antoinette, the daughter of the Austrian Empress Maria Theresa, had married the Dauphin of France, the heir to the French throne, the future Louis XVI, and in doing so had sealed an alliance between two historic enemies, France and Austria. And now the two great Catholic powers of Central Europe were allied to each other. This caused a great deal of resentment on both sides, amongst the French elite, amongst the Austrian elite, who thought that they should still be hating each other. And Louis's job in Vienna was to make sure that this alliance held. In this, he rather spectacularly failed. He was not a very tactful man. He did not earn the respect of Maria Theresa, who was a very pious woman, through his rather louche behavior. On one occasion, he offended her deeply by hosting a dinner party at which the guests were sat on round tables rather than the traditional long ones, which she thought was an assault upon the chastity of the virgins of Vienna. And his most serious mistake, however, was when he sent a dispatch back to the foreign minister in Versailles, in which he described a secret plot that had been hatched between the Austrians, the Prussians, and the Russians to partition Poland between them. Poland was an ally of France, the French queen was Polish, and in it he rather satirically described Maria Theresa as, in one hand, holding a handkerchief to wipe away her tears, and in the other, brandishing the sword of partition. Now, this letter got read out at a dinner party hosted by the king's mistress, Madame du Barry, back in Versailles in France, and Marie Antoinette learnt about it, and she was outraged that her mother was being mocked in such a fashion, and she swore never to have anything to do with the Cardinal de Rohan again. So when he returns from his posting in Vienna, he discovers that his political career has been blocked, and despite numerous other achievements, he becomes a cardinal. He eventually succeeds his uncle as Bishop of Strasbourg. He becomes Grand Almoner of which is the head of the French church, which means that every time he's at Versailles, he has to celebrate Mass for the royal family, and in doing so, he can feel the heat of the Queen's contempt on the back of his neck, and she refuses to speak to him at all. So all of this means that he has this kind of seething sense of resentment, that something, that he has failed to fulfill what he felt is owed to him. He has failed to become chief minister. And this makes him particularly ripe to the overtures of an attractive, vivacious, intelligent young woman whom he meets in 1791. And her name is Jeanne, Comtesse de la Motte Valois. Now, Jeanne has her own interesting story. She is descended from an illegitimate branch of the previous dynasty that ruled in France, the Valois, from Henry II. He gave lands to his illegitimate son in Champagne in the north of France, where the wine comes from. But over a period of about 200 years, they gradually got diminished and eaten away and sold off, so that by the time Jeanne is born, the family are living in a rundown chateau. They're forced to rely on the charity of their neighbors. Jeanne's father is very amiable but a drunk. Her mother beats them, and soon after she's born, the family escape to Paris to get away from their creditors. There, Jeanne's father dies in a poorhouse, and according to Jeanne's memoirs, which it should be said are highly unreliable, and therefore events probably didn't occur in this form exactly, he held her by her hand and said, "Never forget that you were a Valois, never forget that you are a member of a royal dynasty." And whether or not this actually happened, what is clear from Jeanne's behavior for the rest of her life is that she felt that she deserved to be treated like a royal, she deserved to live like a royal, she deserved to be accepted into the ranks of at least the nobility. So Jeanne is soon abandoned by her mother. She's discovered by the side of the road begging, shouting out her little lungs, crying, "Have pity on the last remnant of the Valois." A kindly, noble lady called the Marquise de Boulainvilliers takes Jeanne in. She says, "Treat my own daughters like your sisters." She can't believe that such a person of such distinguished lineage is out on the streets begging, and now Jeanne thinks this is her meal ticket, that she has got everything sorted. Unfortunately, the Marquise has different thoughts on the subject. She thinks that all she has to do is set Jeanne up in a profession, so she tries to get apprenticed off as a seamstress and then as a lady's maid, and Jeanne is not having anything to do with it. These professions are entirely beneath her. She wants to live like a royal. So at the age of 18, with the Marquise's permission, she returns to her native lands in Champagne in the hope that she can recover some of the property that she feels was illegally swindled from her and from her family. There she rapidly falls pregnant to and marries in quick succession an army officer named Nicolas de la Motte. They style themselves the Comte and Comtesse de la Motte Valois, which they had absolutely no right to do, but this was pretty standard for 18th century France. The children die, unfortunately, shortly after they're born, and they are rather unsuccessful in their attempts to regain the land that they believe is theirs. They do, however, find out that it belongs now to the French royal family, to the King Louis XVI, and therefore they feel if they can convince the king to return the land, they'll be able to live in a slightly more luxurious fashion. So through the Marquise de Boulainvilliers, Jeanne meets the Cardinal de Rohan in 1781. He's very taken by her. He says he'll do everything to help her. Unfortunately, he says, what she needs is someone with the ear of the Queen, someone who is able to put her case before Marie Antoinette, because if she can do that, then surely everything she desires will happen. Unfortunately, he is exactly the wrong person to do this because the Queen hates him. So he does a bit. He manages to get Jeanne a pension. They become lovers, probably at least for a brief while. They certainly become friends for a longer period of time. And for a couple of years, Jeanne traipses around after the court, trying to find ministers and influential people who she could interest in her case, and get the lands restored to her. This comes to nothing. And so she resorts eventually to a radical course of action. In the 2nd of February, 1784, she finds herself in the Mirrored Gallery at Versailles with her petition clutched to her chest, waiting for the Queen to walk by. As the Queen walks by, Jeanne feigns a spectacular fainting fit, collapses on the floor, frothers, and hopes that the Queen, who has a reputation for sentimentality, will take an interest in her case. The Queen sweeps by. She doesn't notice or doesn't care. She doesn't send after to find out what the matter was with this woman who collapsed in front of her. But that is not what Jeanne tells her friends. She says that actually the Queen did send after her. She invited Jeanne into her private chambers. There she heard about her case. She was horrified that a descendant of the Valois was living in such poverty. She promised to do everything that she could, and it so happened that she kept receiving these invitations, and gradually they became the best of friends. This was Jeanne's story, and suddenly she found that people treated her entirely differently. Where once doors had been closed, they now opened. People started giving her money in the hope she might interest the Queen in their cases. And above all, the Cardinal Rohan begged her to convey an apology from him to the Queen, because he saw finally that Jeanne was his route to resuscitating his political career, that he could finally achieve his ambition of becoming chief minister. Jeanne plays this very carefully. She says it's kind of too early for me to begin raising this matter. I can't possibly speak to the Queen about this now. And she gets Rohan begging and begging and begging until she finally says, okay, the Queen has given you permission to write a letter of apology. At this point begins a correspondence of possibly up to 200 letters between Rohan and a woman who he thinks is the Queen. What is contained in these letters, we don't actually know because they don't survive, but they certainly overstep the bounds of propriety that one would expect between a subject and his monarch. Rohan refers to himself as l'esclave, the slave. He refers to the Queen as le maître, the master. And there is this deep kind of sexual overtone, erotic overtone that runs through them. And what is clear that the Queen is also promising that when the time is ripe, she will make sure that Rohan is appointed chief minister when she is able to approach her husband, Louis XVI, and tell him that this enmity that has long existed between Rohan and Marie Antoinette was now over, and they were now friends with each other. Of course, the letters weren't written by Marie Antoinette. They were dictated by Jeanne to her lover, a man called Rétaux de Villette, who transcribed them onto little blue-bordered pieces of notepaper they bought from the local stationers. As the spring of war into the summer of 1784, it became clear to Rohan that while he understood that he couldn't have a meeting with the Queen in public because the political conditions were not ready for that, he didn't understand why he couldn't meet the Queen in private. What was wrong with that? And in order to prevent these kind of slight worries growing into more serious suspicions, Jeanne promised a meeting with the Queen. Now this presented something of a problem to her, because where on earth was she going to find a queen from? She didn't know the Queen, and how was she going to pull off this commitment that she made? So it happened that her husband Nicolas had discovered in the Palais Royal, which was a kind of pleasure garden and shopping arcade in the center of Paris, a prostitute named Nicole Legay, whose long neck, high forehead, and jutting jaw meant that she resembled no one so much as Marie Antoinette. He paid court to her, he visited her a number of times. What went on these visits, no one quite says, though I think we can probably guess. And eventually, he says, "Can I introduce you to a great lady of the court?" and brings his wife round to visit. Jeanne says, "I'm brilliant friends with the Queen. Look, here's some letters written in the Queen's handwriting. Don't you recognize it?" Well, of course, Nicole didn't recognize it because she'd never seen the Queen's handwriting. "The Queen wants a little favor from you. Will you do this? By the way, there's 15,000 francs in it for you if you do." How could Nicole refuse? So one summer evening, she is taken down to the gardens of Versailles, where she is dressed in a muslin dress of exactly the same kind the Queen had been painted in a portrait exhibited in the Salon the year before, which had caused scandal because everyone who visited thought that she was in her underwear. She's dressed in this thin muslin dress. She's given a rose and a letter and told that you're going to be taken to the gardens of Versailles. There a man will approach you. You will hand this rose and letter over and say you know what this means. At the same time, Rohan is being led to Paris by Jeanne's husband, Nicolas, who says, "This is the evening you're finally going to get to meet the Queen." He's taken through the gardens of Versailles to a grove just near the edge of the terrace called the Grove of Venus, the goddess of love. And there he sees a figure outlined in the dark against a bush on the far side. He approaches her. His heart is pounding. His head is spinning. There are tears in his eyes at this momentous moment in his life. He kneels before her. The rose and the letter are handed over, and suddenly there are cries of quick, quick, go. People are approaching, and they split. Nicole is led off in one direction, Rohan is led off in the other direction, and he is utterly convinced that he has met the Queen. And at this point, he is putty in Jeanne's hands. She can do whatever she wants with him. A few days later, he receives a letter from the Queen, which says, "Would you please hand over 100,000 francs to the Comtesse de la Motte Valois, for her to distribute to some poor noblemen." He hands it over without batting an eyelid, even though he's up to his eyes in debt. More money is handed over. The La Mottes suddenly start to find themselves being able to live a life they think that they deserve. They redecorate their house. They buy silks and tapestries, crystal, silver. They buy an entire country property in Champagne, where she was from. But nonetheless, they still keep one small room in the house unfurnished, which is where they entertain the Cardinal de Rohan whenever he comes, so that he is convinced that they are still living in relative poverty. At the end of 1784...
You can go until 1:15.
Oh, right, okay. I've been going quite quickly. Okay, at the end of... I'll slow down a bit. I can go to 1:15, apparently, so there may be some time for questions. At the end of 1784, there is an opportunity presents itself to Jeanne de la Motte, which has the possibility to set her up forever in terms of money, in terms of wealth, that she'll never have to worry about making or finding a living for herself again. The crown jewelers, who are two Germans called Boehmer and Bossange, had constructed one of the most expensive pieces of jewelry in Europe. It was a diamond necklace worth 1.6 million francs. It had 647 stones, weighed 2,800 carats. It was so heavy, it required 2 streamers to run down the back in order to stop the wearer toppling over. And it was absolutely hideous. I mean, incredibly ugly. They had been commissioned, it was said, by the former king, Louis XV, in order that he might present this to his mistress, Madame du Barry. But as events turned out, he died before the necklace was finished, and the jewelers were left with this very expensive, not very desirable piece of jewelry in their hand, of which, and there were only a limited number of people who had the purchasing power to buy it. So they were convinced, however, that Marie Antoinette, who had just come to the throne after the death of Louis XV, they believed, she loves jewels, she's definitely going to buy the necklace. Well, this wasn't the case. Marie Antoinette, quite rightly, thought the necklace was very ugly. She tended not to wear necklaces because she had a very elegant neck, and she felt that it interfered with the line of the neck. And on one occasion, she very patriotically declared, "We are in more of need of a battleship than another piece of jewelry." Nonetheless, the Burmans kept trying. They kept trying to sell the necklace to her until the point where Burma is in her company. He breaks down weeping, saying, "Unless you buy this necklace from me, my family, my business will be utterly ruined." And Marie Antoinette gives this short shrift. She has no time for it. She says, "Get up, stop being an idiot, never speak to me of this necklace again." So they try to sell it abroad, to no avail. They can't get rid of it. And with over 10 years of having this piece of jewelry on their books, it's starting to drag their business down to the point that they might be going bankrupt. At the end of 1784, news filters through that the Queen is pregnant. And the jewelers know that a royal birth means one thing, which is presents for everybody. So they think that even though Marie Antoinette has said numerous times that she doesn't want the necklace, they might be able to sell it to her this time and get rid of their financial troubles. So they've heard, as many other people had, that Jeanne, Comtesse de la Motte Valois, was one of the Queen's best friends. So they decided to approach her. They said, "Can you try and help us sell this necklace to the Queen?" Jeanne says, "Oh, I never meddle in matters like this," which was obvious nonsense. I mean, she'd been meddling and meddling and meddling for months. But a seed is sown in her mind about the possibilities that might arise if she gets a hand on this necklace. So at the beginning of January 1785, Rohan receives a letter from the Queen which says, "Will you please act for me in a very serious secret matter? I want to buy Burma and Bassange's necklace. The king does not know about this, but will you prove your devotion and service to me in such a way?" Now, Rohan also thinks the necklace is very ugly, can't understand why the Queen wants to buy it, but he agrees to do so because he's convinced that if he shows his loyalty in this matter, he will finally achieve his desire of becoming chief minister. And in doing this, he knows that he is going against the wishes of the king, that the king was known to want to rein in the Queen's expenditure, and so he is somehow engaging, it might be seen in a certain light, in quasi-treasonous behavior. Jeanne tells the jewelers, "You'll be visited by a great man." He goes to the jewelers, he says, "I'm negotiating on behalf of a very prestigious person, I can't say whom." The jewelers obviously know who it is, but they play along. The terms of the sale are agreed. The first payment is to fall due in 6 months' time, in August 1785. The jewelers are so desperate to get rid of the necklace that they don't even require a down payment. And because of this, because he realizes in quite how weak a position the jewelers are, Rohan asks Jeanne if the Queen will sign a bill of sale so that at least they will have some security in case the Queen changes her mind, which, it should be said, she had a reputation for doing. So Jeanne says, "Absolutely, there's no need for this. We don't need to have a signed bill of sale." Rohan insists. And so a bill of sale comes back. Next to each of the terms is written the word approuvé, approved, and at the bottom is signed Marie Antoinette de France, and the form for the signature becomes important later. The necklace is handed over to Rohan. He takes it to Jeanne's apartments in Versailles. There he waits for an emissary from the Queen. There is a knock on the door, a shout of "In the name of the Queen." Rohan scuttles into an alcove and looks on. He sees a man enter and the necklace handed over to him. The man is in fact Jeanne's lover, Retto de Villette, disguised in the livery of a servant of the Queen. So at this point, Rohan is convinced that the Queen has the necklace. He tells the jewelers that he was actually acting on behalf of the Queen, and they have both been told by Jeanne that they won't see the Queen wearing the necklace in public for a while, because she's going to wait for an opportune moment to inform her husband of her purchase of the necklace, or because she's not going to pay for it until she's not going to wear it until the debt is paid off. Jeanne, Nicolas, her husband, Villette, her lover, break open the necklace. They break the diamonds out of their fastenings with such force that they manage to damage some of them. At first, they try to sell them in Paris, where they rouse suspicions of the amount of diamonds that are being shopped about. And so Villette is actually interrogated by the police, but there's nothing that can be done about it because no one's reported a robbery. So the police close the investigation. The conspirators decide that it would be better if they go over to London and there sell the diamonds, even though the price of diamonds is cheaper in London. Nicolas goes across to London. He sells the diamonds there to a diamond jeweler in Bond Street. Because he can't really restrain himself, he buys all sorts of things, including packets of pearls and a steel sword and a pair of asparagus tongs and all sorts of rather useless impedimenta. But he brings back all of his purchases and quite a lot of cash to Paris. Now, it's worth considering at this point, I think, how could such an audacious plan ever work? Why was it possible that Jeanne de la Motte was able to claim to be one of the Queen's best friends, and no one at any point said anything about it? No one said, well, of course you're not, isn't it obvious that, you don't ever spend any time with the Queen? How could this happen? And in order to do so, I think we need to look a little at the position that Marie Antoinette filled in Versailles. She was born in Austria, and she had a very strict mother, but a very loving father. But more importantly, the environment of the Austrian court was a relatively relaxed one compared to other royal courts at the time. There was little formality. It wasn't quite bourgeois, but it was certainly getting there. And at the age of 14, she is married off to the future King of France, who she hasn't even met yet. She's married in the cathedral in Vienna, where her brother stands in as a proxy for her. She's led to the French border. There she is undressed in order to symbolize that she is abandoning her mother country. She's leaving her home behind, and she's now becoming a French woman. So she knows at this point that it's highly unlikely, she has 10, I think, brothers and sisters. She's highly unlikely ever to see a member of her family again. And this is happening at the age of 14, just as she is entering adulthood. And she arrives in the French court, which is entirely different in atmosphere. That is a court that was held together by all sorts of formal protocols and rituals that had been established by Louis XIV in the 17th century, or reinvigorated by Louis XIV in the 17th century, in order to keep his noblemen from rebelling against him. He'd suffered a rebellion, the Fronde, in the middle of the 17th century, and he thought the best way to make sure that I don't get rebelled against again is to have my noblemen at court with me and have them fighting among themselves over the smallest possible tasks available. So there were highly elaborate daily rituals that took place. There was a lever, getting up in the morning where the king and queen were both woken and richly dressed. There was the coucher in the evening where they were undressed and sent off to bed. They ate in public, and each of these, depending on the level of precedence that you had, it meant the level of your involvement in the formalities. And so Marie Antoinette comes into this environment and finds it, at a time she's about to become an adult, I think, utterly infantilizing, and not to say humiliating. On one occasion, she is left naked and shivering as three noblewomen, each of a higher rank than the other, enter her chamber and demand the privilege of handing her chemise in the morning. And as a reaction to this, she begins a retreat from the public life of the court. She renovates rooms in the palace where she spends time with a very small group called the Société Particulière de la Reine, a small group of people which was mostly made up of insipid women and slightly raddled louche older men. There they painted and made music and they gambled prodigiously. She spent time in the small palace of Trianon right at the far end of the gardens of Versailles, away from the rest of the court where she had her hamlet and her farm. And she gradually stopped engaging with the public life of the court. And this meant that someone like Jeanne de la Motte could come along and can claim that she had been invited into this secret world which no one else was let into, because there were very few people who were around to say, actually, I haven't